Hey guys, Spot here. Thank you for tuning in to the first official video essay on this channel aside from the intro video. So in this one I will be talking about an audiobook that I recently listened to called Extreme Medical Services. Before we get started, some content warnings. For the video I will be describing very broadly medical trauma, medical phobia, and how it affects me and my reading of it, but I'm not going to go into super specific detail. And then also, I'm going to be talking about a plot point that I take issue with due to issues of bodily autonomy. And I know with the Roe v. Wade thing, that can be kind of hard to listen to for some people. And as for the book itself, if you have any sort of medical phobia or trigger, keep that in mind, because this is a book about a paramedic written by a retired paramedic, as well as that aforementioned issue of bodily autonomy. And I should mention that when I put content warnings, I'm not trying to scare anybody away from reading the book. I think that this is still a very good book, and if you're interested in medicine and urban fantasy and such, you should still give it a listen or a read, however you choose. I'm just kind of putting those out there because I know for some people that's important information. Okay, two things. So I misremembered the name of Dean's mentor. His mentor's name is Bryn, not Bridget. So every time you hear me say Bridget, the name is actually Bryn. And also, to add on to the content warning, I kind of took it for granted because it was the theme of the book, but I should probably mention it's a content warning. General discrimination, domestic terrorism targeted against marginalized people. So, this series, of which I listened to the first 3 books in kind of like a bundle deal, is about a paramedic who just graduated the academy and he's eager to start his job, and then he's put in a kind of middle of nowhere station called Station U. And he's like, oh man, this is going to be so boring. What he doesn't realize at first is that Station U is a rather unique case as far as paramedic stations go. Unique is not what DU stands for. It actually stands for unusual, as in supernatural creatures. So he is responding to like zombies with missing arms, or like a werewolf who went to a diabetic episode that caused him to shift, or stuff like that. Like anything that you'd see in an old horror movie or a fairy tale book. There's lots of fae and witches, dryads too, and I think naiads or whatever. It's like a dryad but for a body of water. That's a thing. And then there's that basically any supernatural creature you can think of he runs into, and it's a lot of fun. It's an interesting, it will be a good TV show, I think. It's kind of paced like a TV show, because the first kind of half of it is episodic. It's just going to these different cases. There are some recurring characters, like Gibby, who's a very hapless, possibly bisexual vampire, because all vampires are gay, we know that. He has like this crazy girlfriend that he's constantly getting into mishaps because of, and then he's weird. I like him. And then there's Freddy the zombie, and yeah, I'm getting iCarly vibes from the names, but those are the only 2 names that they share with iCarly. But I find it funny to visualize the characters as like grown-up versions of the iCarly characters. Freddy is a zombie who used to be like an award-winning chef when he was alive, but then he died, and because he's dead he can't really eat. They had to give him the Heimlich maneuver when he swallowed his own tongue after trying to eat. But he's he's a recurring character too, and he's very sweet. Everybody loves him, and he's still a great cook. And there's a couple other recurring characters, like, I find it hilarious that the two main guys, so the main paramedic, his name is Dean, and he has this sort of rival slash, they have kind of an, I almost said enemies to lovers, God, I wish. But they have that kind of dynamic, but platonically. I'm sure there's a phrase. Oh, it's enemies to friends. Yes. That's the platonic version of enemies to lovers. Yes. But this guy, so the paramedic's name is Dean, and the vampire who's the kind of leader of all the unusuals in this city, Baltimore, I think, or Boston. But his name is James. So it's James and Dean. I don't know if it's ever, I think it might have been mentioned or called out in the book itself, or that might just be me thinking it, but that's kind of hilarious. And then there's Dean's mentor, Bridget, who is in a relationship with James, and that's a whole thing. Dean has some sort of complex about it. That's an arc that he goes through in getting over that protectiveness complex, which I have very mixed feelings on. I don't know how I like that subplot. I don't know what it adds to. I don't know. Honestly, the book is at its best when the actual paramedic job is involved. Which makes sense because the author is actually a retired paramedic. So he's drawing a lot on his own experiences and lessons he learned, and it shows. Like, there's this really nice arc where Dean has a particularly bad call, and he is referred to a therapist, and he has to talk to the therapist about it, and he learns that his mental health is important, and that it doesn't make him less manly to seek mental health. Which, that's great. I like that the book kind of undoes a bit of some toxic masculinity tropes that I see often in books written by men. Like, there's a couple times where Dean just gets overwhelmed and cries and, like, needs help. And that's awesome. Like, more men should cry. But then there's a weird dick measuring contest thing with James, and it's annoying as hell. And then poor Bridget's, like, caught in the middle of it. And I just kind of groan whenever that plot point shows up. Although one plot point that does fascinate me is that there's this domestic terrorist group that's trying to eliminate unusuals by saying that they are this, like, secret cabal who's, like, secretly controlling the world because they don't like all the secrecy around it. How many times can I say secret in one sentence? Because the unusuals kind of stay hidden from society, but they fail to realize that the reason the unusuals stay hidden from society is because of people like them. And they basically had this idea that the unusuals are all just, like, horrible monsters, like the kind that you have nightmares about, or that you hear horror stories about. Which is very weird, considering some of them are just, like, people who practice witchcraft, who are just humans who have a different religion, or a different way of practicing their religion. And then there's, like, fairies and dryads and stuff who, like, they can harm people, but most people don't see them as monsters. They're nature spirits, and as long as you respect nature, they don't really bother you. And that's how they're seen in folklore. They're not seen as monsters. So that's a very weird take on that. That's a very lukewarm take. Oh yeah, this domestic terrorist group is called The Cause. I get it, naming things is hard, but I really wish there was a better name for it, because that just does not sound very intimidating or informative, or it sounds like something that you would name it in the first draft before you settled on the actual name. And I say that because that's literally what I named a group of villains in the first draft of one of my stories. Before I changed it to Pandemonium, which might have gone too far in the other direction, but they have a whole demon thing going on, and Pandemonium means place of demons, and I never claimed to be a good writer. Moving on. I really like the world building in general, though. I like how different things are thought of, and like seeing how the unusuals kind of integrate into society in their own ways. Like one really inspired, using that on purpose, inspired choice that I saw was that Dean's therapist is a muse. As in, she can kind of inspire people to think creatively, which is amazing because that's what a good therapist does. Like, my own therapist is great, and that's how it goes. Like, she doesn't tell me what to do. She will sometimes, like, tell me things that she knows about psychology that are relevant to what's going on with me, but she doesn't tell me what to do with it. She just kind of leads me to come to my own conclusions. Sometimes it's as simple as, like, I'm talking about something and just casually and kind of accepting it as a fact of my life, and then she just asks, and how do you feel about that? Or do you feel happy about that? And I sit there for a second and I think, and I start crying. So it's things like that. That's what a good therapist does. And yeah, the muse thing really makes a lot of sense, and that's a really neat take on it. And I kind of wish we got to see more of her and more of the therapy sessions in general, because they're kind of glossed over. Like, the actual sessions themselves are kind of glossed over, which I think was a huge missed opportunity. Another thing I really like about this series is how it handles medical professionals dealing with marginalized communities with different needs than the norm, which is awesome to see as somebody who has had horrible experiences with medical professionals, let's say. This is kind of something I'm still working on in my therapy, so it's something that's a little hard for me to talk about, but I have made progress with it, so I think I can talk about it a little bit. So, I'm autistic, which means, for me at least, that I'm very hypersensitive to touch and physical sensations, which means that I need a bit more painkillers than the average person, and that things that are just mildly uncomfortable to others are torture to me. In particular, needles. Like, any sort of needle, doesn't matter how big or small it is, it hurts. Unless I use, like, a lidocaine cream or something like that, which is something that a lot of medical people do not understand or do not have the patience to accommodate. Which I get it, doctors are really busy, they have a lot going on, and people like me are in the minority. However, that shit kind of builds up and leads me to not really trust or want to be around medical professionals, which has led to me ignoring serious medical problems until they become bigger and require, like, hospital stays and stuff. Which, of course, just compounds my trauma. So I've been working on that and developing better relationships with finding good doctors and nurses, and recently found a good gynecologist. That's a very important thing to think about. If you have parts that require you to see a gynecologist, like, find one who's trauma informed if you have trauma. So, things like that are really important to consider. And I like that the book kind of addresses some of that, in that Dean is very open-minded and comes up with creative solutions and is generally very sympathetic to the people that he treats and sees them as human, which is all great and the proper attitude to have for people who might have different needs. However, this does lead to a major plot point later in this first arc that I have issues with, that I want to talk about, but it's going to be a spoiler. So I will say here that I do recommend this book. If anything I've said interests you, do look into it. I think it's worth reading. However, keep in mind that there is a later plot point involving Bridget and a choice Dean has to make that's just kind of weird. And I will talk about that now. Okay, so as the book goes on, there's this plot point. So Dean has a girlfriend who is an angel and also a nurse, which is another great combination. So Dean's angel girlfriend, whose name I can't remember for the life of me. Honestly, her character is not super standout, as in her personality. She's just kind of really nice, and that's kind of all I can say about her. I think the next arc will focus more on her character and the complexities of her character, which I'm looking forward to. But anyway, so because she's an angel, she's here because there's a prophecy involving the unusual community in the city that Dean is in. And the prophecy also involves James and Dean. And they have to work together to solve this major problem, which turns out to be the cause. And there's also a choice that Dean has to make. And she says that she tells Dean when he's worried about it, she's like, don't worry, just do your job. So, okay. I don't like prophecies. So I was like, I guess this is a thing that is happening. Okay, let's go back to the ambulance calls, please. So anyway, that plot does happen, and things between the unusuals and the cause escalate to where they start going after Station U and their friends directly, and they have Gibby hostage, and there's a kind of fight scene that breaks out, which culminates in Dean doing kind of a hostage negotiation with the guy who is holding Gibby with silver rope, which obviously hurts Gibby because he's a vampire. And so Dean's trying to talk this guy down. And he uses the same kind of attitude he uses as a paramedic, which is really neat to see. Like, he speaks very compassionately to the cause member, who reveals that he's not as evil as the people leading the cause. He's just kind of desperate, I guess, and scared of the unknown as far as the unusuals go. So Dean kind of explains that the unusuals are just people trying to live in peace, and that's why they live in such secrecy, because of shit like this. And he sees that the guy is wounded and is like, okay, can I help you with that wound? And the bad guy says, sure, I guess, I don't have anything to lose. So Dean takes care of the bad guy and then offers the bad guy protection if he turns himself in. And that leads to the cause being, like, caught by the police, which is nice. Very nice wrap-up. And when all that happened, I was like, okay, so that's the choice that Dean had to make. That's neat. That ties everything up perfectly. And the characters thought that too. Ashley, I think the angel's name is. Is it Ashley? I think so. She says, no, it's not. There's still something else going on that you have to make a choice about. Like, okay, we'll see where this goes. So then after, the main group of baddies is defeated, everybody celebrates in this Unusuals Only nightclub. It's very fun. And then there's a shootout in the nightclub, which as a queer person was really jarring to listen to. And I hate that in audiobooks, especially while I'm working, I can't easily skip past scenes like that. Like, there's still a small cabal of cause members who are mad, and that leads to Bridget being gravely injured. She basically dies. And so Dean and James are standing over her body like, what the fuck do we do? And then Dean tells James, this is the decision he realizes. Dean tells James, you have to turn her. Like, I'm making the decision for her. This is how he phrases it, is that he is making the decision for her, that James has to turn her. Okay, so that happens, and Bridget wakes up a vampire, and is immediately absolutely feral with vampire instincts. And James informs Dean that it's going to take her a few years to get a handle on those vampire instincts, and that she might never be a paramedic again. Like, Bridget's been at this for longer than Dean. Like, being a paramedic and taking care of unusuals especially is her life. That is, like, her life's purpose. So, Dean made the decision to revive her after she had died and kind of bring her back to life, but at the cost of her life's purpose. And it's phrased as a decision he made for her. I mean, there is a little bit of nuance to this in that because she's dating a vampire, he obviously drinks from her. And in the lore of this universe, in order to turn somebody into a vampire, you have to, like, exchange blood. So he drank from her, and then he also gave her some of his blood to turn her into a vampire. So she knew that was a risk, but there was never a scene, as far as I can recall, where she was like, hey, if I die, can you please turn me? Or anything like that. And James never mentions anything like that either. So, I don't know if this was a decision she would have made if she had the opportunity. But Dean decided that was the best course of action. Which, as a woman, reading about a man making a decision for a woman is very uncomfortable. And I'm sure that this would not be as uncomfortable if Roe v. Wade hadn't just been overturned. But still, it reads as very weird and uncomfortable. Like, clearly written by a man who has some blind spots. I'm not saying that the author is a bad person. There was a little interview between the author and the narrator at the end of the audiobook, and they both sound like very chill guys, and the author himself sounds very progressive, but he also is an older white man, and there are going to be some blind spots as far as, like, what he knows about marginalized people and women. And it shows. There's also the fact that a lot of the scenes involving women are kind of written weirdly, as in, like, they'll make comments like, oh, it's a girl thing, or it's just how women are, or this particularly infuriating scene where there's this, okay, so Dean technically has a fairy child because I already talked about spoilers. If you're this far into the thing, you don't care about spoilers. So, he helped deliver a baby, and the fairy named the baby after Dean. And so, he technically has, like, his fairy child. Fairies have wings. So, and the mom said that the child is going to be a paramedic one day. This is going somewhere, I swear. So, they're talking about that. And Dean says, what's she going to do about her wings? Like, how is she going to conceal them, or, like, with the uniform? And Bridget says, oh, women have their ways. Like, really? You couldn't just give an answer? Like, I've thought about this because I'm writing a webcomic right now where the main character has insect wings, and I thought about how she's gonna wear clothes. And I came up with, when she is in her human disguise, she folds them up under her clothes real easily. They fold flat against her back because they're insect wings and they're skinny. And then when she needs them to fly but still needs to wear clothes, she cuts slits in some of her shirts so that she can fly with clothes on. Easy. I don't know why that wasn't addressed, but that just seemed very weird to me. Like, I don't know why the whole ladies have their secrets thing was necessary when an actual answer could have been given. Again, though, I do really appreciate that this book avoids a lot of the more annoying tropes that are seen in books written by men, especially older men. It is definitely a lot more progressive than a lot of books of that nature that I've seen. So it's definitely worth a read if you're interested in medicine and urban fantasy. Like, I would definitely still recommend it.